I mean, I know I'm different than a lot of people. I don't really make friends with a lot of people. Like, I'm being completely quiet and I'm around people and I'm nervous. I say something I don't mean to. I just don't want to be around all those other people. I don't want to know what they're thinking. I had a good teacher who, I don't know what happened to her. She noticed that I could be autistic with Asperger's syndrome. Yeah, I'm always wearing my hood or a hat. People don't really pay attention to you if you're wearing a hood, I guess, because it kind of hides you, I guess you could say.
The thing about autism is it covers a wide range. It's a spectrum of symptoms. The term ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder, is a fairly new term for a group of childhood behavioural disorders. Some children, like Andrew, have a milder form of autism called Asperger's syndrome. To those who aren't autistic, people with Asperger's might seem a little off or unusual in the way they understand and organise the world. But in general, they're able to function and they get along in the world pretty well. Attention deficit syndrome or hyperactivity are also sometimes said to be part of the autistic range. People with these milder forms of autism usually go to school, have jobs when they grow up, and in their own individual ways relate to other people. But at the other, more severe end of the autistic spectrum, it's another story.
My niece, who's now 14 months of age, when her dad comes home, she becomes very excited. When her dad smiles at her, she smiles back. Children with autism don't do that.
Adam was 2 years and 3 months old. Going out was a nightmare. People would come up to him and he would cover his eyes with his hands and he'd scream. And if he wasn't in the buggy, he would run away. He'd stopped sleeping almost completely.
When Lewis was diagnosed, he was 4.5. There were no schools available to Lewis. He went to a special needs school, not an autism specific school.
An empty room with a chair and a couch, and any child spending an hour there would be a long time for. But particularly for Lewis, an hour would be like an eternity.
But it wasn't.
And instead of them just kind of saying, well, he's bored, let's do something with him, they'd put him in holes when he threw these toys. They'd hold him down on the ground. And he'd be so frustrated when he'd get up, he'd slap them. Because they'd hold him down maybe for 5 or 10 minutes.
He would hit his head on the floor, head bang. He would bite his hand and he would line up all his toys in a line all around the house or put them in piles.
I mind him constantly 24 hours a day. You can't watch television. He poured water into the television the last time it was broken. There's no shower. There's holes in the bath. The toilet now doesn't flush. My bed's broken. I mean, the list goes on.
These kids are on high alert. There's a lion constantly in the room for them. And unfortunately, their nervous system is in overdrive and their blood sugar is all over the place. But their bodies eventually can't keep pace with this.
Their behavior is not woeful neglect of rules or wanton disregard for adult authority. You have a child that's not speaking. The only thing they have is their behavior, their physical motion, and their screaming. That's all they've got, so they use that. If a parent sees some of those characteristics, doesn't look around, try to engage him in play, doesn't point to things that he wants, doesn't reach for you, doesn't reach for food, doesn't make eye contact, you need to get intervention as soon as possible.
All international research tells politicians, legislators, if you put early interventions in, right the way through the early stages of an autistic person's life, the benefits at post-18 level are huge.
The next question was, well, what services are there? And there just wasn't any. There was nothing.
They set them up, there's no intervention, and then as their behaviour deteriorates, they go, oh look, that because of the severity of the behaviour, he has to go into the psychiatric ward. And I said, realistically, just give it to me straight. Where is he going after this place? She said Portrane, because there's no place for him. It's Portrane.
One of the reports we got was stated from the public services, and it stated, early intervention is in place. Adam has access to speech therapy, occupational therapy, etc. But the key word was access. It didn't mean he was actually getting these services, and we discovered after that he wasn't, in fact.
There's a lag, though, in between research that's coming out effectively and the services that we're implementing. There's a gap.
Definitely there aren't enough staff trained. In fact, there's a huge deficit in people who are qualified.
We had a psychiatric nurse from the school who actually banged on the door and told me he was behaving like an animal and did he get his pill, because she wanted on Respiratory schizophrenic medication.
When I researched the medication, it's a major sedative.
It slows down the electrical impulses in the brain.
The mothers, we know that the mothers, which is every time will tell you that I've looked into my child's eyes and I know that my child disappeared. I saw my child and my child was there. And I know that what's happened to my child now has been caused by something.
In the 50s and 60s in the States, you actually had a situation where parents were told that this condition was caused by their mother's inability to form an emotional bond with their child had caused this condition, which must have been horrendous. Here in Ireland, the increase in the incidence of autism, it all started around 1990. Now, people keep on saying, oh, it's better diagnosis, it's better this, it's better that. Rubbish. I've seen kids with classic autism. They weren't here in the 1960s and 70s. Not in the numbers. Of course, they were here, but not in the numbers.
What's happening to children diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder symptoms are that they have a genetic predisposition, an environmental insult that triggers off the symptoms, and a lack of detoxifying elements within your child's system. From my research back over 11 years, I find that mostly autistic symptoms are developing from the environmental factors that we have. However, without an environmental trigger, that will not happen.
The real big influx of chemicals, drug companies, that's the last 10 to 15 years. Increase in the area, the last 10 to 15 years. In the Cork City or Cork City surrounds, probably the most obvious example is the Lower Harbour area, which has probably got, anecdotally, for a similar type of population to the other side of the city, probably twice the amount of incidence of ASD children. Big, huge pockets, all of a sudden, downwind of all these industries where there was many children with many medical problems. A lot of them respiratory for obvious reasons, and also high incidence of ASD kids.
These children seem to have a higher build-up of toxic metals in their body. They may have inherited those through the womb, through toxic overload. If their parents were exposed to these toxins, it may have come later. But the fact is they can't seem to eliminate these toxins.
The symptoms that we were seeing in our son were consistent with what we were reading as the symptoms of mercury poisoning. We didn't realise these were components of the vaccines.
Hang on a second. You're injecting into small children the third most toxic substance on the planet. Maybe this isn't wise. They kept increasing the number of vaccines with this toxic substance in it. They also then decreased the age that they were giving these vaccines.
A lot of parents notice that when the child starts getting vaccinations, they started noticing things were going wrong. This has caused a lot of controversy because it's caused parents to think that there is a great link with vaccination and autism. The virus used in the measles vaccine affects the gut in children with predisposition to develop autism. I would like to state here that vaccination does not cause autism.
We decided to undertake chelation therapy, And the results that we saw were again a much lessening of symptoms. His tiptoe walking disappeared. Even his hair had changed in texture and it returned to normal.
The numbers of autistic people coming up to the age of 18 within the next 6-7 years is going to be massive. It's huge.
The prevalence of autism is increasing at such a rate that it is very hard to even get minimal services into parents as soon as possible.
So what are people going to do when all these children hit that age group, post-18?
We fight here on the ground so much, we campaign so much, and we don't realise that the people who control the funding, they never heard of it before. You know, it's not affecting them and they don't know. The
politicians in this country, I'm afraid, they plan on a 5-year cycle, which is basically the election cycle. And they don't seem to be able to actually plan over a longer period, and that type of planning is what's needed.
Like one of the big problems that has, I suppose, effectively divided professionals amongst themselves is whether you go with particular educational approaches or whether you go with eclectic educational approaches. Now, the research evidence would suggest that applied behaviour analysis is one of the most effective methods of actually delivering an education service.
But now we can go beyond working on modifying behaviors and work on some of the underlying issues that are giving the children trouble.
The spontaneous interaction, what we call floor time.
We want to harness the child's motivation, so we make it a problem-solving approach. I want a kiss and I'll give it to you.
Have a kiss?
Give me a kiss and I'll give it to you. Give me a kiss and I'll give it to you.
Have a kiss?
Okay.
Yeah,
wait, no, don't hold him,
don't
hold him, don't hold him, don't hold him.
More kiss.
This is all about engaging, it's all about intimacy, it's all about him feeling comfortable with intimacy.
There can be great issues with sensory motor skills, and these mostly will show how they're affected is by the children's coordination and their ability or inability to grasp small objects, to hold a pencil, to use a paintbrush.
Speech is a motor act. It's something that if there's neurologically a motor problem, then the child will might have trouble with their walking and their writing and their speech and language. A lot of my work is around working with the sensory aspects of oral motor work, getting children to suck through straws of different sizes, getting them to blow bubbles.
If your child you feel has delays, if he's not like other children, he's probably not, as simple as that sounds. What happens if you wait till he's 3, 4, 5, and 6? You and the child would be paying for that for the rest of their life. The worst thing that we can do to these kids is do nothing. Any therapy, pretty much, is better than no therapy. Be flexible to anything that's out there. If something's not working, throw it out. Go try something else. Fear was our biggest motivator because there was nothing there that was going to be of any real use to Adam. We were funding therapies privately, all educational materials, everything. The other alternative for us was untenable. We would not ever allow any of our children, to end up possibly in an institution.
I took it upon myself. I read everything I could read. I got recommendations of books from friends and things. I was up all night watching on the internet, trying to source information on how I could help Cian any little bit at all. My intention was that I'd keep trying, and if something didn't work, then well and good, move on to something else, try something else. I never lost my faith. I started using a sensory integration program, and I also started doing, shortly after that I started a music program. He had lots of benefit from all these therapies together.
We've had some great successes with our intervention. We use a total communication approach
basically any communication that works, in other words, to get these very young children communicating. For example, we have had one child who's completely taken off the autistic spectrum.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
We looked on the internet and we discovered a lot of information on diet intervention for children with autism, and the reasoning behind it. It appeared to make a lot of sense to us. Before we put him on the diet, he would often be laughing at things that I couldn't see. To an extent, I began to think one time, was the house haunted? We noticed a huge change in Adam almost immediately. And the longer he was on the diet, the more he actually improved. His coordination and his pincer grip even. His sleep pattern improved. His eye contact also improved. And he seemed to be much more alert and with it.
So it's critical that professionals are all the time updating their knowledge in respect of, what's the newest information. How can we use this new information to help us make better decisions, design better treatments, design better education programs?
He represents not just one little child, Lewis, but there are lots of Lewises, and there's still going to be lots of Lewises. The point I'm actually making is not so much about Lewis as to the state of care for autistics within this country.
The only help for these children is through parents providing it, and the only way you can provide it is you have to actually take your own government, the state, through the courts to force them to provide what is already a child's constitutional right in the first place.
So you only get Europe's attention if you show that there's an epidemic. Once Europe decides there's a problem, and once Europe decides it's costing them future workers, Europe will put pressure on the countries to do something about it. And then our country and other countries will have to turn around and say, well, okay, we've got to start giving better education, we have to start giving therapy, and they will also turn around and say, we've got to start preventing this from happening.
When we started, he was non-verbal. Now his communication skills are excellent. He's just started national school, mainstream school, and he's making friends. He loves going out. We go to all the normal things now that we couldn't have gone to one time. Go to the circus, children's theatre. Adam is very happy and social. And he's able to read and write, and he's learning Irish. At one time, we worried that he might not have a first language, let alone two.
I knew nothing about disabilities until my own daughter was diagnosed. I didn't do anything to try and learn anything about disabilities until my own daughter was diagnosed. I really think the only way we're going to get to solving the massive problem of autism in Ireland is if when society as a whole takes responsibility. I didn't know what was going to happen for my daughter. I saw the same fear in other parents and I didn't like it. And I thought there's something we can do about it. I started meeting other parents who were in similar sort of positions. Why was Saplings founded? There was a saying we had, it was founded upon the basis of a nightmare that's turned into a wonderful dream. One child was moving on, and we have a whole graduation party. At the end, the child's grandmother stepped forward and said, when he came here, he was lost and you found him.